Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You are watching and listening to Historian Radio's Echoes of the News, and I am Muhammad Hussain Qazi, and these are today's headlines from the past. On this day, the 10th of November 1871, Henry Morton Stanley, sent out to Africa by his newspaper to find Scottish missionary David Livingstone, finally made contact with him at Ujiji on Lake Tanganyika in what is now Tanzania, with the immortal words, "Dr. Livingstone, I presume." This would be a significant date and an interesting date in the history of the exploration of Africa. Continuing on this date, in 1928, Hirohito was crowned Emperor of Japan. The Crown Prince, aged 27, had been regent for 7 years before taking over from his sick father. This would be a significant date in the history of human events, as Emperor Hirohito would be Japan's wartime monarch. That is to say, he would be the monarch at the time of the Second World War. And in major part, the Japanese atrocities committed by the military were committed in his name. Continuing on the date of the horrors of World War II and the events leading up to it, in 1938, the Kristallnacht in Germany would take place. In the early hours, the Nazis burned 267 synagogues and destroyed thousands of Jewish homes and businesses. This would be one of the most horrifying events in the history of the Holocaust and in the history of the events leading up to the rise of vehement anti Semitism in Nazi Germany, and of course the rise of the events leading up to the Second World War. Moving forward, on this day in 1975, on the subject of tragic events, on this day, the 10th of November 1975, on Lake Superior, a few miles from the safety of Whitefish Point, the SS Edmund Fitzgerald, one of the most iconic and powerful carriers to have crossed Lake Superior on the business of trade, would sink. Unfortunately, with all 29 crew members on board, there would be no survivors. The Edmund Fitzgerald is remembered in history as one of the most famous cruisers, famous carriers or cruisers to sink on Lake Superior, which is known to be one of the deadliest of the Great Lakes for seafarers. Edmund Fitzgerald was unfortunately not the first ship to have been claimed by the Great Lake Superior. It is also worthy of mentioning that the loss of the SS Edmund Fitzgerald with its 29 crew members on board was commemorated in Gordon Lightfoot's song, "The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald." And on that unfortunate note, we conclude today's headlines of the day, and we now move on to the next segment of our show, where we recount the famous births and deaths of famous figures from the 19th and 20th centuries, and sometimes earlier. Born on this day in 1889 was Claude Rains, one of Hollywood's most iconic actors, who is best remembered for playing the role of the French Inspector General, not Inspector General, the Chief of the Police, in the movie Casablanca, one of the most iconic films starring Humphrey Bogart, Ingrid Bergman, and Claude Rains himself. Claude Rains is also remembered as the villain of the film Notorious, starring Ingrid Bergman and Cary Grant. And unfortunately, on this day in 1938, Kemal Atatürk, the founder of the modern Republic of Turkey, would pass away on this day, the 10th of November 1938. Following his passing in 1982, Leonid Brezhnev, chairman of the Council of Ministers, the General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, and the Premier of the Soviet Union, would pass away. He would have died on this day, the 10th of November 1982. And on that note, we conclude today's headlines of the day. You are watching and listening to Historian Radio's Echoes of the News, and I am Muhammad Hussain Qazi, and these are today's headlines as history first heard them. Good night.